What happens when prejudice and professionalism collide at 35,000 feet? We're about to tell you a story that's more than just an airline incident. It's a story of hidden biases, deep-seated trauma, and the shocking moment when the truth is revealed in the most dramatic way possible. A flight attendant so certain in her judgment refuses to believe a black man is a pilot. But her reaction when he calmly walks into the cockpit is nothing compared to the devastating karma that was already hurtling toward her. This isn't just a story you hear, it's one you feel. Stay with us. The air in the first-class cabin of American Airlines Flight 1776 from Atlanta to San Francisco was a tightly controlled symphony of manufactured calm. The low hum of the auxiliary power unit, the gentle clinking of ice in glasses, the rustle of expensive jackets being stored away. It was all designed to soothe the nerves of those who paid a premium for comfort. Captain Marcus Thorne, however, was not a passenger in the traditional sense. He was deadheading, repositioning for his next assignment. Dressed in a sharply tailored charcoal suit without his pilot's insignia jacket, he looked more like a successful tech entrepreneur than the man who would be responsible for the lives of 184 souls on the next leg of his journey. He settled into Seat 2B, his leather satchel containing his flight essentials, stowed neatly under the seat in front of him. He was a man of precision and order, a reflection of his profession. The lead flight attendant for the first-class cabin was a woman named Karen Miller. In her mid-40s, with blonde hair pulled back into a severe bun, and a smile that never quite reached her eyes, she moved through the cabin with a brittle efficiency. She saw the world in neat little boxes, and her job was to ensure every box was ticked. Marcus noticed her from the moment he boarded. He had a pilot's eye for detail, an ingrained habit of observing everything. The state of the cabin, the demeanor of the crew, the subtle anxieties of the passengers. He saw the flash of irritation on Karen's face when a passenger in 3A asked for help with a stubborn overhead bin. He heard the condescending sweetness in her voice when she explained to an elderly woman that her carry-on was in fact too large for the cabin. Karen was a coiled spring of stress and judgment. The initial spark of conflict was innocuous, a technical glitch. The in-flight entertainment screen at Marcus's seat was frozen on the airline's logo. He tried the standard reset procedure, holding the power button to no avail. When Karen passed by, he politely caught her attention. "Excuse me, miss," he said, his voice calm and level. "My screen seems to be stuck. Is there a cabin-wide reset you can perform?" Karen glanced at the screen, then at Marcus. Her eyes did a quick, dismissive sweep of his face, his dark skin, his relaxed but confident posture. It was a look he had seen 1,000 times before, a micro-calculation of his worth and place. "Sir," she said, her tone dripping with manufactured patience, "you can try holding the power button for 10 seconds. If that doesn't work, we can report it to maintenance upon landing." "I've tried that," Marcus replied evenly. "Sometimes on the 737-800 series, there's a master control panel override that can reboot a specific block of seats. It's usually a faster fix." Karen stopped. She turned fully towards him, her hands on her hips. The smile was gone. "And how would you know that?" The question hung in the air, thick with insinuation. A few nearby passengers glanced over, sensing the shift in tone. Marcus refused to be baited. He had faced far more pressure in storm-tossed cockpits than he ever would from a disgruntled flight attendant. "I have some familiarity with the aircraft," he said, leaving it at that. But Karen wasn't leaving it at that. To her, his calm confidence was arrogance. His technical knowledge was an affront. In her mind, the box he belonged in did not include intimate knowledge of a Boeing's avionics. "Sir," she said, her voice now louder, attracting more attention. "With all due respect, we have our own procedures. We don't need passengers telling us how to do our jobs. Please just relax, and we will handle it." The public challenge was a line crossed. Marcus felt the familiar heat of frustration but suppressed it with the discipline of 1,000 flight hours. He met her gaze, his expression unreadable. "I am relaxed," he said softly. "I was just offering a suggestion. I'm a pilot. With this airline, I fly this aircraft." A beat of silence. Then a short, sharp laugh erupted from Karen. It was a sound of pure, unadulterated disbelief. "You're a pilot," she scoffed, not even trying to hide her derision. "Right. Okay. And I'm the Queen of England." She turned to the passenger across the aisle, a man in a garish Hawaiian shirt, and rolled her eyes, seeking an ally in her ridicule. "Some people will say anything, for an upgrade, won't they?" The cabin, which had been a low hum of activity, was now starkly silent around them. Everyone was watching. Marcus felt the sting of humiliation, not for himself, but for the uniform he represented, even when he wasn't wearing it. He could have shown her his ID, he could have escalated, but that was not his way. Command, he knew, was not about winning small battles. It was about maintaining control. He simply gave a slow, deliberate nod. "All right then," he said, his voice betraying no emotion. He turned his attention back to his frozen screen, effectively dismissing her. Karen, feeling victorious, puffed up slightly and continued her rounds, but the atmosphere was soured. She had made her point, she thought. She had put the arrogant man in his place. 20 minutes later, the cabin door was closed, and the lead flight attendant for the entire aircraft, a warm and professional woman named Maria Rodriguez, made the welcome announcement. But she followed it with an addendum. "Ladies and gentlemen, we do have a slight delay due to a last-minute crew change. The captain scheduled for this flight has been taken ill. We are fortunate to have a replacement captain who was already on board. We should be underway shortly." A low murmur went through the cabin. In seat 2B, Marcus Thorne felt a vibration from his phone. It was a text from dispatch Marcus capped. "Evans is down with food poisoning. You're up. Report to Cockpit ASAP." He unbuckled his seatbelt and stood. From his satchel he retrieved his official pilot's jacket, black, with the 4 distinguished stripes of a captain on the epaulets and the American Airlines insignia over the breast. He slid it on over his suit. The transformation was immediate and absolute. The anonymous black man in a nice suit was gone. In his place stood the unmistakable figure of authority on an aircraft. He took a step into the aisle, his gaze sweeping over the passengers, and then it landed on Karen Miller, who was standing near the galley, her back stiffening as she saw him. Marcus walked calmly and purposefully down the aisle toward the front of the plane. Every eye in first class followed him. They had all been witness to the earlier exchange. They watched as he approached the still stunned Karen. He didn't stop to gloat or to say, "I told you so." He simply gave her a brief professional nod, the same nod a captain gives his crew. And then he walked past her, rapped his knuckles twice on the cockpit door, and disappeared inside. The cockpit door clicked shut, leaving a silence in the cabin that was louder than any engine. Every passenger stared at Karen Miller. Her face, which had been a mask of smug certainty just moments before, had collapsed into a canvas of pure, unadulterated shock. Her complexion went from pale to ashen. Her mouth was slightly agape, and for a terrifying second it looked as if she might be sick right there on the galley floor. The Queen of England had just been dethroned in front of her entire court. The journey to San Francisco had not even begun, but for Karen Miller the world had already tilted off its axis. Inside the cockpit, the atmosphere was a stark contrast to the simmering drama in the cabin. It was a sanctuary of focused professionalism. First Officer David Chen, a young, sharp pilot with a perpetually cheerful demeanor, looked up from his pre-flight checks as Marcus slid into the captain's seat. Marcus. What are you doing here? I thought you were catching a ride to your Hawaii flight tomorrow. Change of plans, Dave Marcus said, plugging his headset into the console. His movements were fluid and economical, the practiced motions of a man in his natural habitat. Evans went down with a bad burrito. Dispatch called me up to the big leagues. No kidding, poor guy. Well, his loss is our gain, David said with a grin. Checklists are nearly complete, ready to get this bird in the air. Marcus scanned the glowing instrument panels, his mind instantly cataloguing every reading, every light. Almost. Just one thing. He paused, adjusting his headset. The lead FA in first class, Karen Miller. We had a misunderstanding before I came in. She might be a little off her game. Just keep an eye on the cabin communication, and let's make sure we're extra clear with our calls. I want this flight to be textbook. David caught the subtle undertone. A misunderstanding with a senior crew member serious enough for the captain to mention it before takeoff was unusual. Roger that, Captain. Extra clear. Textbook it is. Marcus keyed the intercom, his voice now transformed by the slight electronic filter of the PA system. It was a voice of pure command, deep, steady, and exuding an unshakable confidence that was the airline's most valuable asset. Good morning, folks. This is Captain Marcus Thorne speaking. Apologies for the slight delay. My first officer, David Chen, and I are completing our final checks, and we expect to be pushing back from the gate in just a few minutes. Flight time to San Francisco will be approximately 4 hours and 50 minutes. It looks like a smooth ride for the most part. So please sit back, relax, and we'll have you on the West Coast shortly. Cabin crew. Please prepare for departure. In the first-class galley, Karen Miller heard that voice and flinched as if struck. Captain Marcus Thorne. The name echoed in her head. The calm, authoritative tone was a direct refutation of the narrative she had constructed. He wasn't arrogant. He was in charge. He wasn't lying. He was the commander. Her world had been thrown into a nauseating spin. Humiliation was a hot, bitter taste in her mouth. She felt the weight of dozens of eyes on her, the eyes of the passengers who had seen her hubris. Her prejudice laid bare. She could feel the judgment radiating from the man in the Hawaiian shirt and the pity from the elderly woman she had condescended to earlier. Lead flight attendant Maria Rodriguez entered the galley, her brow furrowed with concern. Karen. Are you all right? You look like you've seen a ghost. Karen jumped, startled. I'm fine. She snapped her voice higher and tighter than she intended. She busied herself polishing an already gleaming coffee pot. Just a bit of a headache. Maria wasn't convinced. She was a veteran of the skies and could read crew members like a weather chart. Karen was broadcasting a Category 5 storm. Okay, well, the new captain seems to have things well in hand. Did you know him? No. Karen lied, the word catching in her throat. Never met him. She couldn't bring herself to admit the truth. Admitting it would mean admitting her own gross misjudgment, her unprofessionalism, her bigotry. The word hovered in her mind, ugly and undeniable. She shoved it down. It wasn't about race, she told herself frantically. It was his attitude. He was smug. He was challenging her authority. But the excuse felt thin and brittle even to her. As the plane taxied and took off with a powerful, seamless ascent, Karen went through the motions of her job like an automaton. Her hands trembled as she poured champagne. She avoided eye contact with everyone in seats 1A through 4F. Every standard PA announcement from the cockpit, Captain Thorne pointing out the Grand Canyon to the left. Captain Thorne giving an update on their arrival time was a fresh wave of mortification. She began to spiral. This couldn't be her fault. It couldn't. If she was at fault, her career could be in jeopardy. A formal passenger complaint about a flight attendant's rudeness was one thing. A complaint from a captain. That was a career killer. Desperation began to curdle into a strange, venomous form of self-preservation. She couldn't be the villain of this story. Therefore, he had to be. During the beverage service, she spoke quietly to another flight attendant, a junior crew member named Chloe, who worked in the main cabin. "There's something off about this new captain," Karen whispered, leaning in conspiratorially over the cart. Chloe looked surprised. "Really?" "He sounds great on the PA. Very reassuring." "That's just it?" Karen pressed her eyes wide with feigned concern. "It's an act. He was incredibly aggressive to me before the flight. Demanding, arrogant, honestly a little unstable. I'm concerned." She was planting a seed, a poisonous weed of doubt. If she couldn't deny what happened, perhaps she could reframe it. She wasn't a prejudiced fool. She was a diligent flight attendant who had correctly identified a problematic pilot. An hour later, the flight hit an unexpected patch of turbulence over the Rockies. It wasn't dangerous, but it was sharp and sudden, rattling the cabin and sending a few drinks sloshing. A nervous flyer in the main cabin let out a small cry of fear. Instantly, the seatbelt sign chimed and Captain Thorne's voice filled the cabin again, a blanket of calm over the anxiety. "Apologies for that, folks. Just a little bumpy air, nothing to be concerned about. We're climbing another 2,000 feet to get above it. Should be smooth again in 5 to 10 minutes. To my crew, please remain seated for now." His voice worked like a tranquilizer. The nervous passenger quieted, and the tension in the cabin eased. It was a masterful display of in-flight command. But for Karen, it was another nail in her coffin. He was too perfect. Too professional. His competence was making her look even worse. The seed of doubt she planted with Chloe wasn't enough. She had to do more. She waited until the turbulence passed, and then made her way to the rear galley, where Maria Rodriguez was preparing the final service. "Maria," she began, her voice trembling, a performance of a lifetime. "I have to tell you something. I'm really worried about Captain Thorne. My pre-flight interaction with him, it wasn't just a misunderstanding. He was hostile. He got right in my face. When this turbulence hit, my first thought was, is he stable enough to be flying this plane?" Maria stopped what she was doing and stared at Karen, her expression hardening. "Karen, what are you saying? Are you questioning the fitness of the captain? Mid-flight?" "I'm just saying what I experienced." Karen insisted, tears now welling in her eyes, a mix of genuine panic and calculated drama. "He has an intimidating presence. I felt targeted. I think he's got a chip on his shoulder about something." Maria Rodriguez had been with the airline for 25 years. She had seen everything. She had dealt with abusive passengers, medical emergencies, and crew disputes. And she knew the smell of desperation. What Karen was doing was unprecedented and dangerous. Questioning a captain's fitness was the nuclear option, a charge that could ground a pilot and trigger a massive investigation. To do so based on a vague feeling of being intimidated was reckless. Captain Thorne's landing was one of the smoothest I've felt this year, Maria said, her voice cold and clipped. His calls have been precise. His handling of that turbulence was textbook. What you're alleging is extremely serious. You need to be very, very sure of yourself before you continue down this path. The warning was clear. Maria didn't believe her. The walls were closing in. Karen's desperate attempt to rewrite the narrative had backfired, only serving to cast her own judgment and stability into doubt. As the plane began its final descent into San Francisco, the iconic spans of the Golden Gate Bridge visible through the windows, a sense of doom settled over Karen. The flight had been, by all objective measures, perfect. The landing was, as Maria had predicted, a butter landing, so smooth it was barely perceptible. As passengers deplaned, many made a point to peek into the cockpit to thank the pilots. Several of them, the ones who had witnessed the initial confrontation, gave Marcus a thumbs up or a nod of deep respect. The man in the Hawaiian shirt paused by the galley, where Karen stood frozen. "You know," he said, his voice low and dripping with contempt, "you owe that man an apology." Karen said nothing. She couldn't. She just stood there, her face a mask of crumbling defiance as the last passenger left the aircraft. The battle was over. She had lost. But the war she was about to discover had only just begun. The moment Flight 1776 was secured at the gate at SFO, the professional protocols took over. For Captain Marcus Thorne, this meant one final unpleasant task. He debriefed with his first officer, David Chen, and the lead flight attendant, Maria Rodriguez, in the quiet of the cockpit. He was factual, dispassionate, and direct. "Maria, I need to file an official report regarding the incident with flight attendant Miller before departure." He stated, his voice devoid of anger, which somehow made it more damning. "She publicly and aggressively challenged my credentials in front of the first-class cabin. Her subsequent behavior, as you yourself noted, was erratic, and I've just been made aware she was attempting to spread rumors about my stability to other crew members mid-flight." He looked at Maria, who nodded grimly. "She made a very serious and, in my opinion, baseless allegation to me in the AFT galley captain. I have it documented in my flight report already." This was news to Marcus. It wasn't just about the initial insult anymore. Karen had actively tried to undermine his authority and question his fitness for command while they were in the air. This elevated the incident from a simple case of unprofessionalism to a potential safety issue. "Thank you, Maria Marcus," said, his jaw tight. "That's significant." He spent the next hour writing his report, sticking to the unvarnished facts. He detailed the exchange, quoting Karen's words verbatim. "You're a pilot, right? And I'm the Queen of England." He documented her attempt to rally another passenger to her side. He included Maria's corroboration of Karen's dangerous, subversive gossip during the flight. He didn't need to add emotional language. The facts themselves painted a picture of a flight attendant whose personal prejudice had spiraled into a dangerous breach of protocol. 2 days later, back at her home base in Dallas-Fort Worth, Karen Miller was summoned to a meeting with an airline executive and a representative from her union. She walked into the sterile, grey-walled HR office with a carefully rehearsed story of victimhood. She painted Marcus Thorne as a new breed of pilot, arrogant, aggressive, and looking for a confrontation. She claimed his tone was menacing, that she felt physically intimidated by his presence. She twisted his calm confidence into smug condescension. "He set me up," she said, her voice trembling with practiced indignation. He wanted to make me look bad. I was just trying to do my job, and he used his position to humiliate me. And then his flying. It felt erratic. The turbulence was much worse than he let on. I was genuinely concerned for the safety of the flight. The union representative, a portly man named Jeff, listened sympathetically, nodding at all the right moments. He saw this as a classic case of management overreach. It's a he said, she said. Karen, he whispered to her before the airline executive, a stern woman named Linda Davenport, began to speak. Stick to your story. They can't prove a thing. Linda Davenport listened to Karen's entire performance, without interruption. Her face was a neutral mask. When Karen finished, Linda slid a tablet across the table. Ms. Miller. She said, her voice as cold and hard as granite. We've reviewed Captain Thorne's report and lead flight attendant Rodriguez's report. Both are exemplary employees with spotless records. Your version of events, to be frank, seems embellished. It's the truth, Karen insisted. Is it? Linda tapped the screen of the tablet. Because we also received 2 unsolicited emails from passengers on that flight. One is from a Mr. Alistair Finch. He's a partner at a major corporate law firm in San Francisco. He was seated in 3D. He details with legal precision your unprovoked and racially charged verbal attack on Captain Thorne. Karen's blood ran cold. The second email, Linda continued, her eyes boring into Karen, is from a travel vlogger named Ben Carter, who was in seat 1A. He was, and I quote, so disgusted by the flight attendant's behavior that I had to report it. He goes on to say that while he didn't film the incident, his digital audio recorder, which he uses to narrate his videos, happened to be on. He attached the file. Linda tapped the screen again. A crystal-clear audio file played into the silent room. Marcus's voice. Excuse me, miss. My screen seems to be stuck. Karen's voice. And how would you know that Marcus's voice? I'm a pilot. With this airline, I fly this aircraft. Karen's voice, followed by the sharp, ugly laugh. You're a pilot, right? Okay. And I'm the Queen of England. The recording continued, capturing her snide remark to the other passenger. The silence that followed the playback was deafening. The union rep Jeff stared at the table, his face ashen. He slowly pushed his chair back, distancing himself from his client. He had been played. Karen felt the floor drop out from beneath her. The truth in high-fidelity audio had just obliterated her web of lies. There was no ambiguity, no he said, she said. There was only the stark, ugly reality of her own voice, her own prejudice, her own career-ending mistake. Ms. Miller Linda Davenport said, her voice now edged with ice. Your actions were not only a gross violation of company policy and professional conduct, but your decision to then lie about the incident, and worse attempt to undermine the captain's authority mid-flight, constitutes a grave safety risk. You are suspended without pay, effective immediately pending a final termination hearing, which I assure you is a formality at this point. The words hit Karen like a physical blow. Suspended. Terminated. 22 years of her life, her identity, her income, gone. Erased by a 30-second exchange born of her own arrogance. She stumbled out of the office in a daze. The world felt unreal. It wasn't fair. It was his fault. Captain Marcus Thorne. He had done this to her. He had ruined her life. The suspension began a dark, downward spiral. The paychecks stopped. The calls from concerned colleagues dwindled as the story, the real story, backed by audio evidence, leaked through the airline's grapevine. She was a pariah. alone in her small, tidy house, the silence amplifying her rage. Karen became obsessed. She couldn't accept her own fault. The blame had to lie elsewhere. It had to lie with him. She took to the internet, her fingers flying across the keyboard in a feverish haze. Who was this Captain Marcus Thorne? There had to be something, some skeleton in his closet, some piece of dirt she could use to justify her own actions, to prove to the world and to herself that she had been right about him all along. She Googled his name. At first, she found the standard results press releases from the airline, a LinkedIn profile detailing a stellar career, a photo of him shaking hands with a senator at a charity event. It only fueled her rage. He was perfect. Too perfect. She dug deeper, adding search terms like scandal, lawsuit, reprimand. Nothing. She was about to give up, to sink into the abyss of her own making, when she tried a different approach. She searched for his family. And that's when she found it. An old article from a local newspaper in Virginia, dated almost 20 years prior. It was about his father. General Robert Thorne, a celebrated and decorated Air Force pilot, one of the pioneers who had broken racial barriers in military aviation. A hero. But the article wasn't about his heroism. It was about a tragedy. The headline read, "General's plane crashes in Blue Ridge Mountains. 3 dead." Karen's breath hitched. She read the article, her heart pounding in her chest. A small private plane, a Beechcraft Bonanza piloted by General Thorne, had gone down in bad weather. The general had survived pulling himself from the wreckage with critical injuries. His 3 passengers had not been so fortunate. Karen scrolled down to the names of the deceased. Her eyes scanned the first 2 names without recognition. Then they fell on the third. And recent college graduate Jessica Miller, 22, of Dale City. Jessica Miller. Jessie. Karen let out a sound that was half scream, half sob. The room began to spin. It couldn't be. It was a different Miller, it had to be. But she knew. Dale City. 22 years old. Her sister. Her vibrant, funny, brilliant older sister, whose loss had shattered her family and carved a hole in her own heart that had never healed. The karma that had struck her wasn't just about a lost job or a ruined reputation. It was a ghost from the past, an unseen force that had been shaping her life, her anger, and her prejudices for 2 decades. The man she had tried to destroy was the son of the man she had always in a dark, secret corner of her heart blamed for her sister's death. The drama of Flight 1776 was no longer a simple story of workplace prejudice. It had just become a Greek tragedy. The discovery didn't bring clarity. It brought a twisted, horrifying kind of validation. Karen's world, which had been crumbling, suddenly snapped into a new and terrible shape. The vague feelings of resentment she held, the snap judgments, the deeply ingrained prejudice, it all suddenly had a source, a name. Thorne. For 20 years, the story of the crash had been a forbidden topic in her family. Her father, a man broken by grief, had refused to accept the official findings. Karen's memories of that time were a blur of hushed arguments, her mother's endless tears, and her father's bitter, poison-laced muttering. Hotshot general. Too arrogant to turn back. Thought he was better than the weather. He had never read the NTSB report. To him, the man at the controls was the only one to blame. And he had planted that seed of blame deep in the heart of his surviving daughter. Karen had never consciously connected her general bitterness with the specifics of the crash, but the poison had been there dormant in her subconscious. It manifested as a distrust of authority, a resentment of perceived arrogance, and through a tragic and unfair mental leap, It had fused with the racial biases of the society around her. In her traumatized mind, the image of a confident, authoritative black pilot had become a symbol of the man who had, in her father's telling, killed her sister. Marcus Thorne wasn't just some random pilot she had decided to target. He was the ghost in the machine of her life, the living embodiment of a 2-decade-old trauma. This revelation did not calm her. It ignited her. The suspension, the audio recording, the impending termination, it was all part of a larger injustice. The Thornes, with their power and prestige, were getting away with it again. First the father, a hero, who walked away from a crash that killed her sister. Now the son, another perfect pilot, ruining her life with his smug professionalism. Her grief, unprocessed and curdled for 20 years, now had a target. It was no longer about her job. It was about Jessie. Over the next week, Karen became a woman possessed. She stopped eating. She barely slept. She spent her days and nights digging, poring over old articles, forums, for aviation enthusiasts, anything she could find about the crash. She ignored the official NTSB report summary, available online, which cited catastrophic and unforeseeable mechanical failure of the right aileron cable. In her mind, that was a cover-up, a story concocted to protect a powerful general. She was looking for dissenters, for conspiracy theories, for anything that would confirm her father's bitter narrative. She found whispers and rumors, the kind that always follow high-profile accidents, and she clung to them like a life raft. Her sanity was fraying her sense of reality, replaced by a singular burning mission for vengeance. She found out where the airline's main pilot training and simulator facility was located, a sprawling campus near the DFW airport. She knew Marcus, being a captain, would have mandatory recurrent training there. It was just a matter of waiting. 2 weeks after the flight, Marcus Thorne was walking across the parking lot of the training facility, heading in for a session in the 737 simulator. He was reviewing procedures on his tablet, his mind focused on the complex task ahead. The incident with Karen Miller, while disturbing, was in his rear-view mirror. The system had worked. A problem was identified, reported, and handled. He had moved on. Captain Thorne. The voice was sharp, ragged. He looked up from his tablet and saw her. Karen Miller. She was standing between 2 parked cars, and he barely recognized her. The severe controlled flight attendant was gone. This woman was gaunt, her hair unkempt, her eyes burning with a feverish light. She was wearing the same uniform blouse from the flight, now wrinkled and stained. Ms. Miller. Marcus, said, his voice cautious. He stopped, keeping a safe distance. You shouldn't be here. This is a secure facility. I know what you are, she hissed, taking a step toward him. I know who your father is. Marcus was taken aback. My father? What does he have to do with anything? Don't play dumb with me, she shrieked, her voice cracking. The sound echoed in the quiet parking lot. A few heads turned. General Robert Thorne, the big hero, the man who walked away. Marcus felt a cold dread creep up his spine. This was no longer about a confrontation on an airplane. This was something else entirely. Walked away from what he asked, his voice low and firm, trying to de-escalate to control a situation that was rapidly spiraling out of his comprehension. From the crash, Karen screamed the word tearing from her throat. The crash that killed my sister, Jessica Miller. Does that name mean anything to you? Or was she just collateral damage for your father's ego? The name hit Marcus like a physical blow. Jessica Miller. Of course he knew the name. It was one of 3 names that had haunted his father for 20 years. 3 names that were synonymous with his father's deepest and most private pain. He had seen the name in the accident report his father kept locked in his study, the report his father would reread every year on the anniversary of the crash, torturing himself. Marcus looked at the woman in front of him, and for the first time he saw past the angry flight attendant. He saw a shattered soul consumed by a grief so old it had become toxic. My God, he breathed, the pieces clicking into place. You're Jessica's sister. I am. She cried, tears streaming down her face, mingling with rage. And your family destroyed mine. My father was right. He said your father was an arrogant monster who got my sister killed, and now you're just the same, strutting around in your perfect uniform, ruining my life, thinking you're untouchable. Her accusation, raw and unhinged, hung in the air. The long-hidden personal trauma was now laid bare in a corporate parking lot, a primal scream of pain directed at a man who was, until that moment, a complete stranger. Security guards were now jogging toward them, alerted by the shouting. "Ma'am, you need to come with us," one of the guards said gently but firmly, taking her arm. Karen didn't resist. Her energy was spent. The confrontation, the climax of her 20-year obsession, was over. As they led her away, she kept her burning eyes locked on Marcus, her expression a maelstrom of hate, grief, and madness. Marcus stood frozen, his tablet hanging, forgotten at his side. The simulator, the checklists, the entire world of professional aviation had vanished. He was left with the ghost of a 20-year-old crash and a woman whose life had been secretly and inextricably linked to his own. The shocking drama of Flight 1776 had been but a symptom of a much deeper, older, and more tragic disease. The karma that had struck Karen Miller wasn't just that she had lost her job. It was that in her desperate attempt to ruin him, she had inadvertently forced the source of her own lifelong poison into the light. The confrontation in the parking lot was a seismic event, sending shockwaves that radiated through the airline's sedate corporate offices. An emergency meeting was convened. For the airline's legal and HR departments, the situation was now dangerously clear. Karen Miller was no longer just a disgruntled employee who had committed a professional foul. She was a deeply disturbed individual, with a fixation, a potential threat. The termination was swift and clinical. A formal letter, a no-contact order, a legal firewall erected around Captain Thorne and all company property. From a corporate standpoint, the file was stamped closed. But for Marcus Thorne, the file had been ripped wide open. The official closure meant nothing. He couldn't shake the image of Karen's face, not the haughty flight attendant from the plane, but the shattered woman in the parking lot, her eyes burning with a grief so old it had become a form of madness. It replayed in his mind during the drive home as he walked through his quiet house, a ghost of her agony superimposed over his familiar world. He saw not an adversary, but a casualty, a woman drowning in a sea of inherited lies. His own father's quiet, lifelong sorrow over the crash gave him a unique and terrible lens through which to view her pain. He knew the truth, and the weight of that knowledge was unbearable, because he knew with chilling certainty that Karen and her family had never been allowed to know it. His simulator session was postponed indefinitely. The complex, sterile procedures of flight seemed trivial in the face of such raw human wreckage. He went home, the silence of his house amplifying the echo of Karen's screams, and called his father. General Robert Thorne, long retired to a quiet life of fishing and woodworking in the misty hills of North Carolina, answered on the third ring. He was a man of immense dignity and quiet strength, but Marcus, who knew his father's voice better than his own, could still hear the faint, permanent tremor that had been there for 20 years, the ghost of a vibration from a phantom stick fighting a plane that no longer existed. Marcus explained everything, his voice low and steady, as he recounted the incident on the plane, the confrontation in the parking lot, and the name that connected them all. When he finished, the silence on the line was profound, heavy with the weight of 2 decades of unspoken grief. "I remember her," the general finally said, his voice softer, more fragile than Marcus had heard it in years. "Jessica Miller, a bright girl, a firecracker. She wanted to be a human rights lawyer, travel the world. She used to talk about it on the flight. Before..." He trailed off, the memory too sharp. "Her father, a good man, I think, but broken by it. He came to the hospital. Security had to remove him. He just stood there, shouting. He needed someone to blame, a target for the pain. I was the only one left standing." The general sighed, a sound that seemed to carry all the lost years within it. "I never blamed him for it, son. Grief is a kind of madness. It makes people do terrible things to survive." He told Karen it was your fault, Dad. Marcus said, his own voice thick with emotion. "He built her entire life on a foundation of hating you. He told her you were arrogant, that you flew into a storm you couldn't handle, that your pride got her sister killed. It's what was behind everything that happened on that flight. She wasn't seeing me. She was seeing the monster he created for her." Another long silence. Marcus could picture his father sitting in his favorite armchair, looking out at the mountains that so resembled the ones that had tried to claim him. The report, the general said, his voice regaining a sliver of its old command. "The NTSB report is a public document. It's all there in black and white. The metallurgical stress analysis, the schematics, the testimony. The sheared aileron cable, the goddamn metal fatigue that no one could have seen. It wasn't his fault. It wasn't my fault." His voice cracked. "It was just a tragedy, Marcus. An ugly, pointless tragedy." He paused. "I still have nightmares. Not about the crash, about my hands. The feeling of the controls going limp. The utter helplessness. That's the part they never put in the reports." After the call, Marcus felt a profound and unsettling clarity. His path was clear. Every instinct for self-protection, every piece of advice he knew his colleagues and the union would give him, screamed at him to let it go, to stay away, to let the lawyers handle it. But a deeper instinct, the core of the man his father had raised him to be, refused. This felt like a captain's duty, a responsibility that extended beyond the cockpit door. Through the same compassionate HR manager who had expressed deep concern and cautioned him against any contact, he was able to get a message to Karen. He wasn't pressing charges for the confrontation. He didn't want retribution. He wanted to talk. A week later, they met. The venue was a small, sterile, and utterly anonymous meeting room at a public library, a place devoid of memory or emotion. Karen looked like a wraith. The fire in her eyes had been extinguished, leaving behind only hollow, exhausted embers. She was accompanied by her brother-in-law, a quiet, weary-looking man, who regarded Marcus with a mixture of suspicion and apprehension, his presence a clear condition of the meeting. Marcus didn't come with accusations, anger, or even forgiveness. He came prepared. He carried a thick, bound document, which he placed gently on the table between them. It landed with a soft, final thud. "This is the official National Transportation Safety Board accident report," he said, his voice calm and even. "All 114 pages of it. I'm not here to argue with you, Karen. I'm not here to defend my father. I'm here because I believe you and your family deserve to know the unvarnished truth of what happened to your sister." Karen stared at the document as if it were a venomous snake, recoiling slightly. The brother-in-law, however, after a moment's hesitation, reached out with a steady hand and pulled it closer, his brow furrowed in concentration as he opened it to the first page. For the next hour, a strange and sacred silence filled the room, broken only by the rustle of turning pages. Marcus didn't speak. He simply bore witness as two people began the painful process of dismantling a 20-year-old lie. He watched their eyes move across the detailed meteorological charts, the meticulous diagrams of the Beechcraft's control systems, the cold factual timelines. The brother-in-law read with a grim focus, his expression slowly changing from suspicion to dawning understanding. He would occasionally point to a paragraph, showing it to Karen, whose gaze was distant, unfocused. Finally, they reached the core of the report, the section titled Analysis. They read the forensic breakdown of the right aileron control cable. They saw the magnified black and white photographs, showing a clean, catastrophic break with the telltale signs of microscopic metal fatigue. They read the chilling conclusion written in the dispassionate language of aviation investigation. The failure was sudden, total, and unforeseeable. The report went on to detail General Thorne's actions after the failure, the desperate fight against the plane's uncontrollable bank, the attempt to guide the crippled aircraft toward a clearing to avoid a populated valley below. The investigators credited these actions with preventing an even greater loss of life. He didn't walk away unscathed. The report detailed his multiple fractures, his internal injuries, the permanent damage that ended his flying career. It was a photograph of the recovered cable that finally broke through Karen's disassociation, a simple, stark image of a frayed metal rope. She let out a small, choked sound. The dam of a lifetime of misdirected rage finally cracked. She began to weep. Not the loud, angry sobs of her confrontation, but the silent, shuddering, soul-deep tears of a foundation turning to dust. The story that had defined her entire adult life, the bedrock of bitterness her father had so carefully constructed for her, was a fiction. Her sister wasn't a victim of arrogance. She was a victim of physics, of a 1 in a million flaw in a piece of metal. The villain she had spent 2 decades hating was in fact the tragedy's final and only living victim. "My father," she whispered, her voice a hoarse rasp of disbelief. "He never told us any of this. He just said the general was showing off." She looked at Marcus, her eyes finally clear of hatred, now filled with a vast, terrifying emptiness. "He let us hate him. My father has lived with the ghost of your sister and the other 2 passengers every single day for 20 years, Marcus said gently, his voice full of an empathy that transcended their conflict. "There's a different kind of prison, Karen, when you're the one at the controls, the one who survives. The guilt eats you alive. He would have traded places with any of them in a heartbeat." The raw, undeniable truth settled in the quiet library room. Karen Miller's hard karma wasn't losing her job. That was just a consequence. Her real karma was this moment being forced to look into the abyss of her own poisoned soul and see that the poison had been fed to her drop by drop by the person she trusted most. She had lost her career, her reputation, and now the very anger that had fueled her existence. She was left with nothing but the truth and the long, desolate road of healing that lay ahead. Marcus left the report with her. He stood up, gave a slight, compassionate nod to her brother-in-law, and walked away, feeling no sense of victory. Only a profound, aching sadness for the wasted years and the destructive power of a grief that was never allowed to face the truth. The story of Flight 1776 became a quiet legend among the crews, a cautionary tale whispered in galleys and briefing rooms. But for Marcus Thorne, it was a turning point. He continued to fly his command, as impeccable as ever. But something inside him had shifted. He had always understood the mechanics of flight, the physics of lift and drag. Now he had a deeper, more sobering understanding of the invisible baggage every soul on his aircraft carried with them. He had stared into the heart of a human storm and found his way through not with the rules of aviation, but with the unwritten laws of empathy and grace. And that made him more than just a great pilot. It made him a profoundly good man. The story of Flight 1776 is a powerful reminder that the person sitting next to you, the person serving you coffee, the person in a position of authority, has a history you know nothing about. Karen Miller's prejudice was the ugly surface of a deep, unhealed wound. While her actions were inexcusable, the story behind them is a tragedy of its own. It shows how unchecked grief and misinformation can curdle into hate, poisoning a life from the inside out. Captain Marcus Thorne had every right to walk away, but instead he chose a harder path, the path of truth and compassion. What do you think? Was this karma, or was it a tragedy that was bound to erupt? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If this story moved you, please give this video a like, share it with someone who appreciates powerful real-life drama, and make sure you subscribe to our channel for more stories that reveal the truth behind the headlines. Thanks for watching.